unacceptable aspects of the modern world is the amount of change that happens on a mass level. The idea of a global village has long since become a cliché, but it's still true. Never before in the history of the world have there been so many powerful mechanisms for massive, lasting group persuasion. That can mean more people buying Cokes, wearing Levi's jeans, and listening to rock and roll bands. It can also mean massive, positive shifts in attitudes around the world. It all depends on who's doing the persuading and why. In this chapter, we're going to look at the changes that happen on a mass scale, see how they happen, and examine what they mean. Then we're going to look at how you can become a persuader and what you can do with your abilities. We think of our world today as being awash in stimuli, but that's not what really differentiates it from earlier times. An Indian walking through the woods was constantly confronted with sights and sounds and smells that could mean the difference between life and death, between eating and starving. There was no shortage of stimuli in his world. The biggest difference today is in the intent and reach of the stimuli. The Indian in the forest had to interpret the meaning of the random stimuli. In contrast, our world is full of stimuli that are consciously directed to get us to do something. It might be a plea to buy a car or a mandate to vote for a candidate. It might be an appeal to save starving children or a pitch to get us to buy more cake and cookies. It might be an attempt to make us feel good about having something or a message to make us feel bad that we don't have something else. But the main thing that characterizes the modern world is the persistence of persuasion. We're constantly surrounded by people with the means and the technology and the know-how to persuade us to do something. And that persuasion has global reach. The same image that's being pounded into us can be pounded into most of the world at the exact same instant. Let's consider the habit of smoking cigarettes. People in earlier times could have pleaded ignorance, but today we know that cigarettes are harmful to our health. They contribute to everything from cancer to heart disease. There's even a large amount of powerful public sentiment, expressed through local anti-smoking drives or referenda, that makes smokers feel they're doing something bad. People have every reason in the world not to smoke. Yet the tobacco industry continues to profit, and millions of people continue to smoke cigarettes, with more starting all the time. Why is that? People may learn to enjoy the experience of smoking, but is that what got them started? They had to be taught how to use a cigarette as a trigger to create pleasure. It was not a natural response. What happened when they first smoked? They hated it. They coughed and gagged and felt nauseated. Their body said, "This stuff is terrible. Get it away from me." In most cases, if your own physical evidence tells you something is bad, you would expect to listen. So why don't people do that with smoking? Why do they continue to smoke until the body gives in and finally becomes addicted? They do it because they've been reframed as to what smoking means, and then that new representation and state have been anchored into place. Someone with a great deal of knowledge about persuasion has spent millions and millions of dollars to convince the public that smoking is something desirable. Through skillful advertising, clever images and sounds were used to put us in positive feeling states. Then those desired states were associated with or linked to a product called cigarettes. Through massive repetition, the idea of smoking has been linked with various desirable states. There's no inherent value or social content to a piece of paper wrapped around tiny tobacco leaves. But we've been persuaded that smoking is sexy, or suave, or adult, or macho. Want to be like the Marlboro Man? Smoke a cigarette. Want to show that you've come a long way? Baby, smoke a cigarette. You've come a long way, all right. If you've been smoking, you've probably come a long way closer to the possibility of lung cancer. How crazy is this? What in the world does putting carcinogens into your lungs have to do with any desirable state? But advertisers do on a mass scale exactly what we've talked about in this book. They put out images that put you in a receptive, elevated state, and at the peak of the experience, they anchor you with their message. Then they repeat it on television, in magazines, or on the radio so that the anchor gets constantly reinforced and triggered. Why does Coke pay Bill Cosby or Pepsi pay Michael Jackson to sell its products? Why do politicians wrap themselves in the flag? Why is Miller brewed the American way? Why do we love hot dogs, baseball, apple pie, and Chevrolet? These people and symbols are already powerful anchors in the culture, and the advertisers are simply transferring the feeling we have for these people or symbols to their products. They use them as ways to make us receptive to their products. Why did the Reagan TV campaign ads play off the ominous symbol of the bear in the woods? The bear, symbolizing Russia, was a powerful negative anchor that reinforced the image of the need for strong leadership. Something Reagan proposed he would continue to provide. Haven't you seen bears in the woods and felt they were cuddly? Why did this ad affect people in such an ominous way? Because of the setting, the lighting and the words, and Music used. You can break down any effective ad or political campaign and find it follows precise framework we've set up in this book. First, it uses visual and auditory stimuli to put you in the state the promoters desire. Then it anchors your state to a product or action they wish you to take. This, of course, is done time and time again until your nervous system effectively links the state with the product or desired behavior. If it's a good ad, it will use images and sounds that attract and affect all three major representational systems: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. TV is such a persuasive medium because it can make the best use of all three. It can give you pretty pictures, it can include a catchy song or jingle, and it can provide a message with emotional punch. Think of the most effective ads done for a soft drink like Coke or a beer like Miller or a fast food restaurant like McDonald's. Think of the reach out and touch someone ads for the phone company. What they all have in common is a strong VAK mix that offers a hook for everyone. Of course, there are some ads that are effective in producing the opposite image. They break the state in as stark a manner as possible. Think of anti-smoking ads. Have you ever seen the one showing a fetus smoking a cigarette in its mother's womb, or Brooke Shields looking dopey with cigarettes coming out of her ears? Those ads are most effective when they function as pattern interrupts, when they destroy the aura of glamour someone else has tried to create around an unhealthful product. In a world full of persuaders, you can be one, two, or you can be someone who gets persuaded. You can direct your life or be directed. This book has really been about persuasion. It's shown you how to develop the personal power that can put you in control so you can do the persuading, whether as a role model for your kids or as a powerful force at work. The people in power are the persuaders. The people without power simply act on the images and commands that are directed their way. Power today is the ability to communicate and the ability to persuade. If you're a persuader with no legs, you'll persuade someone to carry you. If you have no money, you'll persuade someone to lend you some. Persuasion may be the ultimate skill for creating change. After all, if you're a persuader who's alone in the world and doesn't want to be, you'll find a friend or a lover. If you're a persuader with a good product to sell, you'll find someone who'll buy it. You can have an idea or a product that can change the world, but without the power to persuade, you have nothing. Communicating what you have to offer is what life is all about. It's the most important skill you can develop. Let me give you an example of how powerful this technology is and how much you can do once you master the techniques NLP offers. When I created my first 12-day neuro-linguistic professionals training, I decided to come up with an exercise that would really make people use what they had learned. So, here's what I did. I got everyone in the course together at 11:30 at night and told them to give me their keys, their cash, their credit cards, their wallets. Everything but the clothes on their backs. I told them I wanted to prove that to succeed they didn't need anything but their own personal power and persuasive abilities. I said they had the skills to find and fill people's needs, and they didn't need money, status, a vehicle, or anything else the culture teaches us we need to make our lives the way we want them. We were meeting in Carefree, Arizona. The first challenge was to find a way to get to Phoenix, about an hour away by car. I told them to take excellent care of themselves, to use their skill to arrive healthfully in Phoenix, find a nice place to stay, eat well, and use their persuasion skills in any other ways that seemed effective and empowering, both for themselves and for others. The results were amazing. Many of them were able to get bank loans of from $100 to $500 simply on the force of their personal power and congruence. Remember, they had no identification whatsoever, and they were in a city they'd never been in before. One woman went to a large department store and, without any identification at all, got credit cards she used on the spot. Of the 120 people who went out, about 80% were able to get a job, and 7 people got 3 or more jobs in that one day. One woman wanted to work at the zoo. She was told the zoo had a 6-month waiting list just for volunteers. But she developed so much rapport that she was allowed to come in and work with the animals. She even treated a sick parrot by using NLP skills to stimulate its nervous system. The zoo trainer was so impressed that she ended up doing a mini seminar on how to use these tools to positively affect animals. One guy, who loved children and always wanted to speak to a large group of them, went to a school and said, "I'm a speaker for the assembly. When do I start?" The people said, "What assembly?" He said, "You know, the assembly scheduled for today. I've come a long way. I can wait for up to an hour, but we've got to get started soon." No one was quite sure who he was, but he seemed so sure and congruent, they decided there had to be an assembly. So they got the kids together, and he talked for an Hour and a half on how kids could make their lives better. The kids and teachers loved it. Another woman walked into a bookstore and started autographing a book by TV evangelist Terry Cole Whitaker. She didn't look anything like Terry Cole Whitaker, whose picture was on the cover, but she modeled Terry Cole's walk and facial expressions and laughed so well that the store manager, after being upset with this stranger writing in his books, did a double take and said, "I'm so sorry, Ms. Cole Whitaker. It's an honor to have you here." A couple of other people asked for autographs and bought books while she was there. That day, a number of resourceful individuals cleared up people's phobias and other assorted emotional problems. The point of this exercise was to show these people that they needed nothing more than their own resourceful behaviors and skills to find their way around, without all the usual support systems such as transportation, money, reputation, contacts, credit, and so on, and the majority of them had one of the most powerful and enjoyable days of their lives. They all made great friends and helped hundreds of people. In the first chapter, we talked about how people have different feelings about power. Some think it's somehow unseemly, it means having undue control over others. Let me tell you, in the modern world, persuasion isn't a choice. It's an ever-present fact of life. Someone is always doing the persuading. People are spending millions and millions of dollars to get their messages out with ultimate power and skill. So either you do the persuading, or someone else does. The difference in our children's behavior may be the difference between who is a greater persuader, you and I, are the drug pusher. If you want to have control of your life, if you want to be the most elegant, effective model for those you care about, you've got to learn how to be a persuader. If you abdicate responsibility, there are plenty of others ready to fill the void. By now, you know what these communication skills can mean to you. Now, we need to consider what these skills can mean to all of us together. We live in the most remarkable era in human history, a time when changes that once took decades can now take days, when voyages that once took months can now be made in hours. Many of those changes are good. We live longer, in better comfort, and with more stimulation and freedom than ever before. Some of the changes, however, can also be terrifying. For the first time in history, we know we have the ability to destroy the entire planet, either through horrifying explosions or a long, slow death from polluting and poisoning the planet and ourselves. It's not something most of us want to talk about, it is something our minds move away from, not toward. But these situations are a fact of life. The good news is that while God or human intelligence are pure, some chance, or whatever force or combinations of force you believe affect where we are today, has created these terrifying problems, it has also created the means to change them. I believe all the world problems are factors, but I also believe in a source much larger than my present understanding. To say that there is no source of intelligence that we may call God is like saying Webster's dictionary is the result of an explosion in a print factory and everything came together perfectly and in balance. One day when I started thinking of all the problems of the world, I got very excited because I noticed a common relationship to them all. All human problems are behavioral problems. I hope you're using your precision model right now and are asking, well, let me put it this way, if the source of the problem is not human behavior, there is usually a behavioral solution. For example, crime is not the problem, it's people's behavior that creates this thing we call crime. Many times we take sets of actions and turn them into nouns as if they were objects, when actually they are processes. As long as we represent human problems as if they were things, I believe we disempower ourselves by turning them into something big and beyond our control. Nuclear power or nuclear waste is not the problem. How humans use the atom can be a problem if it's not handled effectively. If we as a country decide these tools are not the most effective or healthful approaches to energy development and consumption, we can change our behavior. Nuclear war is not a problem in and of itself. The way human beings behave is what creates or prevents war. Famine is not the problem. In Africa, human behavior is the problem. Destroying each other's land does not support the creation of a larger food supply. If food shipped in from other humans all over the world is rotting on the docks because humans can't cooperate, that's a behavioral problem. In contrast, the Israelis have done okay in the middle of the desert. So if we can agree, as a useful generalization, that human behavior is the source of human problems or that new human behaviors can solve most other problems that arise, then we can become quite excited because we will understand that these behaviors are the results of the states human beings are in, and are their models of how to respond when they are in these states. We also know that the states from which behavior springs are the result of Their internal representations. We know, for example, that people have linked the process of smoking to a particular state. They don't smoke every minute of every day, only when they're in a smoking state. People don't overeat every minute of every day, only when they are in a state they have linked to overeating. If you effectively change those associations or the linked response, you can effectively change people's behavior. We are now living in an age where the technology needed to communicate messages to almost the entire world is already in place and being used. The technology is the media, radio, television, movies, and print. The movies we see in New York and Los Angeles today are seen in Paris and London tomorrow, Beirut and Managua the day after that, and around the whole world a few days later. So if those movies or books or television shows or other forms of media change people's internal representations and states for the better, they can change the world for the better, too. We've seen how effective the media can be for selling products and spreading culture. We're just now learning how effective they can be in changing the world for the better. Think of the Live Aid concerts. If they weren't an awesome display of the positive power of communication technology, I don't know what is. Therefore, the means to change massive numbers of people's internal representations, and thus massive numbers of people's states, and thus massive numbers of people's behaviors, is available to us now. By effectively using our understanding of the triggers to human behavior and the present-day technology. For communicating these new representations to the masses, we can change the future of our world. The documentary film Scared Straight is a great example of how we can change people's internal representations and thereby change their behaviors by using the resources of the media. It's a documentary of a program in which kids who are producing destructive or delinquent behavior are brought to a prison, where inmate volunteers proceed to change the kids' internal representations of what crime and imprisonment really mean. These kids were interviewed in advance. Most were real tough and said that going to prison wouldn't be a very big deal. Their internal representations and states were effectively changed when a mass murderer began to tell them what life in prison was really like, relating details with an intensity that would change anyone's physiology. Scared Straight is must viewing. Follow-up on the program found it incredibly effective in changing the behaviors of these kids. Television was then able to carry that same experience to huge numbers of kids and adults, simultaneously changing any people's thoughts and behaviors. We can change massive numbers of human behaviors if we can make effective representations that appeal to people in all the primary representational systems, and if we frame things in ways that appeal to all the major metaprograms. When we change the behaviors of the masses, we change the course of history. For example, what was the feeling of most young men in America when asked, how would you feel about going over to fight during World War I? Pretty positive, wasn't it? Why? The representations of most young men about war were created by songs like Over There and by Uncle Sam posters everywhere saying, I want you. The young man of the World War I era probably pictured himself as a savior of democracy and free peoples everywhere. Those kinds of external stimuli represented war in a way that put him in a positive state of desire to go and fight. He volunteered. By contrast, what happened when the Vietnam War hit? What was the feeling of most young men about going and fighting over there? Quite different, wasn't it? Why? Because there was a different set of external stimuli being offered to huge numbers of individuals every night through this new technology called the evening news. It changed their internal representations on a daily basis. People began to represent war as something quite different from what it had been. It was no longer over there. It was now in our living room at dinner time as we watched in vivid detail. It was not big parades or rescuing democracy. Rather, it was watching some 18-year-old kid, just like your own or your neighbor's, getting his face blown off and dying in a faraway jungle. As a result, more and more people developed a new internal representation of what this war meant, and consequently their behaviors changed. I'm not saying the war was bad or good, I'm simply pointing out that as people's internal representations were changed, so was their behavior, and the media created the vehicle for that change. Our feelings and behaviors are even now being changed, some in ways we may not have noticed before. For example, how do you feel about extraterrestrials? Think of movies like E.T. or Starman or Cocoon or Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We used to think of aliens as horrible gooey monsters who would come and eat your face off, swallow your home, and spit out your mother. Now we think of them as beings who hide in a boy's closet and ride bikes with your children till they have to go home, or as guys who loan your grandpa their swimming pool to cool off on hot days. If you were an alien who wanted people to respond to you in a positive way, would you want them to Meet you after they saw Invasion of the Body Snatchers or after they watched a few Steven Spielberg movies. If I were an alien, before I came to a planet like this, I'd get someone to make lots of movies about what a great guy the first am, so people would greet me enthusiastically with open arms. I'd get myself a great PR agent to change the masses' internal representation of who I am and what I'm like. Maybe Steven Spielberg is from a different planet after all. How does a movie like Rambo make you feel about war? It makes killing and napalming seem like great, merry, furious fun, doesn't it? Does that make us more or less receptive to the idea of fighting in a war? Obviously, one movie would have difficulty in changing the behaviors of a country. It's also important to note that Sylvester Stallone is not trying to promote killing people. Quite the contrary, his movies are all about overcoming great limitation through hard work and discipline. They are models of the possibility of winning in spite of great odds. However, it's important for us to observe the effect of the mass culture we impact consistently. It's important for us to be conscious of what we are placing in our minds and make sure it is supporting our desired outcomes. What would happen if you changed an entire world's internal representation of war? What if the same power and technology that could get massive numbers of individuals to fight could be used effectively to bridge value differences and represent the unity of all peoples? Does the technology exist? I believe it does. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that this is easy, that all we have to do is make a few films, show them to everyone, and the world will change. What I am suggesting is that the mechanisms for change are as available as the tools for destruction. I am suggesting that we become more conscious of what we see, hear, and experience on a consistent basis, and that we pay attention to how we represent these experiences to ourselves individually and collectively. If we are to create the results we want within our families, communities, countries, and world, we must become much more conscious. What we consistently represent on a mass scale tends to become internalized in mass numbers of people. These representations affect the future behaviors of a culture and a world. Thus, if we want to create a world that works, we might want to consistently review and plan what we can do to create representations that empower us on a unified global scale. You can live your life one of two ways. You can be like Pavlov's dogs, responding to all the trends and messages that are sent your way. You can be romanced by war, lured by junk food, or captivated by every trend that pours through the tubes. Someone once described advertising as the science of arresting the human intelligence long enough to get money from it. Some of us live in a world of perpetually arrested intelligence. The alternative is to try something more elegant. You can learn to use your brain so that you choose the behaviors and internal representations that will make you a better person and this a better world. You can become aware of when you're being programmed and manipulated. You can determine when your behaviors and the models beamed out at you reflect your real values and when they don't. And then you can act on the things that have real value as you tune out the ones that don't. We live in a world where there seems to be a new trend every month. If you're a persuader, you become a trend creator rather than someone who just reacts to the multitude of messages. The direction in which things are going is as important as what is happening. Directions cause destinations. So it's important to discover the direction of the stream, not wait until you get to the edge of Niagara Falls and find out you're in a small boat with no oars. The job of a persuader is to lead the way, map the terrain, and find the paths that lead to better outcomes. Trends are created by individuals. For example, the national holiday of Thanksgiving was created, not by a political officer, but by a woman who had a strong desire to unite our country. Her name was Sarah Joseph Hale, and she succeeded in a task that had frustrated others for over 250 years. Many people have a false notion that the Thanksgiving holiday has been an American tradition since the Pilgrims first gave thanks in October of 1621, but this is not true. For 155 years after that, there was no regular or unified Thanksgiving celebration held in the colonies. The War of Independence brought forth a victory that was celebrated by the entire country for the first time, and still the tradition was not upheld. The third Thanksgiving was held after the successful drafting of the Constitution, when President George Washington proclaimed November 26, 1789, a day of national Thanksgiving. However, this, too, failed to become a recurring event. Then, in 1827, along came Sarah Joseph Hale, a woman with enough commitment and persistence to make it all happen. The mother of 5 children, she chose to support herself and family by becoming a professional writer at a time in our history when few women were known to be successful in this profession. As the editor of a ladies' magazine, she helped to make it a major national periodical with a circulation of 150,000. She was known for her editorial campaigns on behalf of women's colleges, free public playgrounds, and day nurseries. And she wrote the nursery rhyme, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." However, the most important cause in her life was to create a permanent National Thanksgiving Day. She used her magazine as a major tool to influence those who could institute such a trend for the nation. For almost 36 years, she campaigned for this dream by constantly writing personal letters to presidents and governors. In her magazine, she annually published tempting Thanksgiving menus, featured stories and poetry that focused on Thanksgiving themes, and she wrote editorial after editorial in support of an annual Thanksgiving Day. Finally, the Civil War provided Hale with an opportunity to express her point in a way that would capture the nation. She wrote, "Would it not be a great advantage socially, nationally, and religiously to have the day of our American Thanksgiving positively settled?" In October 1863, she editorialized, putting aside the sectional feelings and local incidents that might be urged by any single state or isolated territory that desired to choose its own time. "Would it not be more noble, more truly American, to become national in unity when we offer to God our tribute of joy and gratitude for the blessings of the year?" She wrote a letter to Secretary of State William Seward, who then showed it to President Abraham Lincoln, who felt the concept of a national unity was precisely right. 4 days later, the president issued a proclamation setting the last Thursday in November 1863 as a National Thanksgiving Day. The rest is history, all because a woman with persistence and persuasive ability effectively used the existing media. Let me offer you 2 possible models for effective trend creation. I try to make a positive difference through education. If we want to have a positive effect on the future, we must give the next generation the most effective tools available for creating their world the way they want it. Our organization attempts to do this through our Unlimited Excellence Camps. In these camps, we teach kids to use the specific tools for running their own brains to direct their own behaviors, and thus the results they create in their lives. They learn to develop deep levels of rapport with people from all backgrounds, to model effective people, to break through limitations, and to reframe their perceptions of what is possible for them. At the end of the course, the majority of the kids tell me it was the most powerful learning experience they've ever had. It's one of the most enjoyable and rewarding programs I have had the privilege to conduct. However, I'm just one person, and our associates can reach out to only so many kids. So we developed a training program to provide teachers with NLP and other optimum performance technology skills. That was a great step in the direction of affecting more kids, though not on a large enough scale to truly create a new trend in education. Now we are in the first stages of conceptualization for another project, which we call the Challenge Foundation. One of the challenges many kids face, particularly those in disadvantaged areas, is that they don't have access to powerful and positive role models. The idea for the Challenge Foundation is to put together a library of interactive video presentations featuring the most powerful, positive role models in our culture. Contemporary people like Supreme Court justices, entertainers, and businessmen, as well as powerful figures who are no longer alive, like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., or Mahatma Gandhi. This will give kids powerful experiences to emulate. You can hear about a Martin Luther King Jr. from a teacher, and you can read King's words, but that's only part of the experience. What if you could spend 30 minutes and have him personally tell you his philosophies and beliefs? And what if in the last 5 minutes he challenged you to do something with your life? I would like kids to be able to model not just words, but tonality, physiology, and the total presence of these master persuaders. Many kids, studying the Constitution, for example, have no idea how it relates to life today. What if we had a video of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court telling students why he dedicates every day of his life to upholding this document and how it affects them today? What if at the end of this he gave these young people a challenge? Could you imagine what would happen if massive numbers of kids across the country could have regular and consistent access to this kind of positive input and challenge? Such a program could change the future. If you have input about such a system, I invite your letters and comments. Another example of how to use influence to create positive new trends is the work of a man named Amory Lovins, director of research at the Rocky Mountain Institute in Snowmass, Colorado. Lovins has been involved in alternative energy projects for several years. Today, many people believe that nuclear power is too costly, too ineffective, and too dangerous to be used. Yet the anti-nuclear movement has made little headway, because it's just that It's anti-nuclear. Many people who move toward solutions wonder what the movement is for. Sometimes it's hard to tell. But Lubbins has been able to have enormous success with energy companies by being a skillful persuader rather than a mere